Okay, so we've got our site so far loading a typeface from Adobe Fonts. We have, in this case, we have Futura. I've chosen that because it's something of a classic typeface, sans serif typeface that comes in a range of weights. Quite a nice, good range of weights. So far the page is still in single column of text, just a bit of placeholder text, a couple of heading styles, some paragraphs, and nothing fancy, and it is responsive. So on a small screen, as you can see, it's perfectly legible. So that's more or less how it would appear on a phone, and on a wider screen, also quite comfortable. And we've got the column of text here with its width constrained using the CH unit. So we're starting to build things up. We've got navigation up here at the top. This is inside the nav element, of course, with a couple of links, but it's pretty basic. So we want to start styling that up. Now, conventionally, we would use a little bit more code than I'm using here, and we'll add that in the coming sessions. But for now, we're just going to, if we flip back to Visual Studio Code and to our home page, we're just going to keep the HTML itself loading like this. So we've got a nav element here, okay, and inside that nav element, that means between the opening tag and the closing tag, we have a couple of links here. So that's the A element there with its reference to different pages here. So href, of course, hypertext reference contains that. I've also put a class attribute on these with a class name of nav-link. Okay, so when you're styling with a class, of course, the CSS class name, we put over here, we put a definition here in styles.css, and those names they're arbitrary. We make them up, but you want them to be something that's fairly self-explanatory. Okay, so that's all good. So what I think, coming back to the page, I think what I want is for the navigation to run the full width of the screen at this stage, regardless of screen width. All right. We are taking, overall in this project, we are taking a mobile first approach, but we won't get into building out things like hamburger menus and so on just yet. So let's make a nice band across there. I think I want it to have a fixed position so that if the page is a bit longer, it just sort of remains in place as I scroll down. Now at the moment, it just has that default behavior, which is that the navigation here moves with the rest of the page. And that's not terrible. It's perfectly functional. You can easily scroll back up to the top of the page to access it. But I think it's a nice kind of affordance for your users when you do have your navigation fixed. All right. So let's do that. Let's come back to Visual Studio Code, just down here. And as you see, we've got the class mentioned here in our HTML. So I'm just going to go over here to styles.css, my CSS file. All right. So down here, I've got the areas where I'm going to put in the actual definition for each of these classes. And of course, working in CSS, when we're defining a CSS class, we have to start that definition with this full stop here, that full point. So I've got these two styles here that I'm going to define. All right, so with the navigation, nav primary, the primary navigation for the website, what do we want? I think we want it to be, first of all, let's give it this property, position. All right, so the position property can have a whole lot of different definitions, but the one we want is fixed. So it's stays in a fixed position on the page. We also need to tell it where on the page we want it to be fixed. So in this case, it's the top. So there's a top property, and it takes a value. All right, so it could be a value in pixels or rems or any other unit. I'm going to say 0, and I'm also going to put in a left value. All right, so it's just going to anchor it at the top left of the page, even as we scroll. So let's save that. Command S. S for save. Come back to the browser. Command R to reload it. You can see that this actually pushed it up and across a little bit into the corner there. So that's definitely probably much tighter than we would want. But watch this. See that as I scroll, the navigation stays in place there. All right. The only, from a purely functional point of view, the main drawback is that it becomes unreadable like this. So I think we need to give it a background color. I also want to give it a bit of space. So I'm going to give the background color and put it in a band that runs full width across the page there. So let's do that. So let's come back to Visual Studio Code and to a CSS file. All right. So I'm going to give it a width of 100%. There is another unit we could use, the VW unit. That would also work, but 100% I think is pretty easy to use, and that's a unit we've already been introduced to. So I'm going to give it a margin at the top. We'll just a margin of 0. That's not going to do a lot, but we might as well put it in for the sake of clarity. Padding is going to be more useful though. All right. So I think we want a reasonable amount of space all the way around. So I'm just going to say, I could say 1 rem at the top. Left and right values could be 0. I'm going to say 1 rem all the way around. So by putting in only one value here for padding, that's going to cover the top, right, bottom, and left of our box model. So padding on all 4 sides there of 1 rem. Okay. So when we come back to the browser and reload it, you can see there's a bit of space, a bit more space there. So, but it could do with the background color, couldn't it? So, give it a background color, an RGB value, I think. Just going to put that in. Now, I've already used this color here. It's kind of pinky red, so I might actually set that. But I'm just going to use this color picker. I'm going to go for something that has about the same hue, meaning its position in over here, but it is a nice kind of dark. So I'm going to go, so I find that seems to often has a certain degree of richness. So it's a saturated dark red, if you like, something like that. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so that's a dark color there. Now, our default links are not going to look too hot against that, are they? I might just set it just a color white. All right, that's not going to change the color of the links, though. The links by default are going to appear in a blue. Okay, so to style the actual links themselves, you have to use this navlink class. Now, if you remember from the HTML, that's the one that I've put down here in the actual link elements, the nav-link class. Okay, so a few things we can do here. One is to give it a color. I'm going to say white. We also probably want to, because they're really like they're not just a link in the text, you probably want to get rid of that default underline there. So let's get rid of that. That's the property called text decoration. And we're going to set that value to none. Right, so text decoration none. That gets rid of the underline. All right, so let's have a look at that. That's a bit better. So that's just to test this, just make sure we're not getting any horizontal scrolling as a result. That's all good. We've got this band of that dark red, almost looks like a black running across there. And the navigation is over here. Now, a couple of things. One is that I think that all of this should be centered. Okay. At the moment, we've got a very basic centered kind of layout. So let's do that. Now, we don't do that down here in the navlink. We actually do this in the nav primary class, because that's the one that's really is more of a layout class. Okay, so we want text align center. Okay, so the reason for that is that it's like a big box, it's running full width, and we want that text aligned right in the middle. So let's have a look at that. There we go. Boom. Got that there. Now, a couple of things. I think that we could afford to use a slightly heavier weight for the type here. And I think we need to space that out a little bit more too. So let's come back and do that. So come back to these lines up here in this CSS comment. I want to get the bold weight of Futura. Now it's already displaying in Futura, so that's all good. It's already font style normal. So that's all actually inheriting from this line up here. You remember it's saying font family Futura, font weight 400, that's the default weight, so that's why we're seeing it in the book weight at the moment, and the font style is normal. Okay, so for the navigation, let's go for font weight of 700. So I'm just going to copy that line. This is like a little box where we store little code snippets, isn't it? So I'm going to come down here to the navlink class and put that in there. So font weight 700. So that's going to give me a bold weight. Now I could actually use the keyword bold. That would probably also work, but we'll go with the exact number. And we want to space them out a little bit. So I'm going to actually give it a little bit of margin. Oops, let's switch to English language input, that would help. So margin, we don't want a top margin, but we do want a left and right margin. So I'm going to space them out a little bit. Let's see how one rem looks. Left and right. So top and bottom, a 0, left and right set to 1. That might be a little bit too much. But let's see how that looks. Yeah, I think it's a little bit far. So I'm just going to drop that down to 0.5 rem. So we have 1 rem of space, which will be 16 pixels in between each of those navigation links. That feels a little bit more comfortable there. Now, a few other things we can do. You can see that when I mouse over it, see how that cursor changes there? So I might also want it to change color. All right, so how do we do that? The answer is a little thing called a pseudo class. So I'm going to make this looks like a copy of navlink, but I'll just add this thing. It's called a pseudo class, because it modifies the behavior of the actual class under this condition. So under the condition that we're looking at in particular is hover. That means that someone's hovering a pointer over it. And in this case, when that happens, we want it to change color. So I'm going to change color to our little accent color, which is actually this one here. So probably not a great choice actually, really, when I think about it, because in some ways, because it is the same as the detonating color, but I do want it to look a little, to rhyme with it a little bit. So I'm just going to choose a different color up here. So reasonably bright kind of red. There. Again, just using that little pop up there with the color values. Okay, so let's see how that looks. So now as I mouse over these, see that changes color. There, that sort of nice sort of watermelon-y kind of red. Okay, so there's navigation. There are other things we could do. We could pop a little transition in there so that the color doesn't just blink on, it sort of fades in or fades out. That's probably more the kind of thing we do in second year. But that's enough to get us a nice, good functioning navigation. And we can pop in the other few links that we need in here later as we build out the site.